Pnawn da, good afternoon. Enw fi yw Una Lloyd. Dwi yma rhan tîm ymarfer daws sydd ar Chwilio Cymru. So good afternoon, my name's Una Lloyd. I'm here on behalf of the Good Practice team, the Wales Audit Office. You're listening live to the Record Keeping Setting the Record Straight webinar. Dwi am estyn croeso cynnes I pawb yma heddiw. Hefyd i'r siaradwyr, rydym ni'n ddiolchgar iawn I chi am amser chi heddiw. Fe fydd y gweddill o'r webinar yn cael ei cynnal trwy gyfrwng Saesneg, ond mae croeso cynnes I chi I anfon cwestiynau trwy gyfrwng Cymraeg neu Saesneg. So the remainder of the webinar will be shared through the medium of English. However, we encourage all questions to be submitted through the medium of English or Welsh. So I understand many of you listening in today, this is your first time listening into the Good Practice webinar. So, what can you expect in this next 75 minutes? Hopefully, it's going to be relaxed and informal because we're having a bit of a chat here. That's what it really is. And actually, you're part of it. It's a virtual chat, if you like. It's very, very interactive. So, let me share with you who's actually listening in. So, we've got clinicians. We've got clinical leads, we've got directors, assistant directors of nursing and patient experience. We have legal colleagues, we've got professional standards and regulations, heads of and senior nurses, heads of record keeping, therapies, community nurses, practice managers in GPs, flying start, information governance, internal audit, just to name a few people who are listening in. So, my warmest welcome to you. So how do you play your part then? So I'm going to ask the panel a series of 4 questions. At the end of each question, it's your opportunity to send the questions in. But don't hold back. If you've already got a question, email them in now because there's nearly 200 of you listening in altogether. So I kind of need to manage your expectations there in terms of questions. And I guess I also need to say at this stage, we're not interested, it's more important about the question, so we guarantee your anonymity. I struggle with that word. So just if you've got a question, please ask it. It's better that you do than you don't. So without further ado, I think it'd be quite important for me to introduce the panel. So starting from my right.
Thank you. I'm Anne-Louise Ferguson. I'm Director of Legal Services for NHS Wales. My specialty is clinical negligence, and I've spent quite a lot of my career coming and talking in various health boards and trusts and haranguing the doctors and the nurses and indeed everybody who's listening as to the importance of keeping good clinical records.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paul Rastall. So by background, I'm a doctor. I work in Cywiro'r in South Wales. But I'm also a clinical fellow with the Health Informatics Unit in London, where I've got a research interest in data quality in record keeping. And I've also got quite a bit of experience in the development of record standards, which I hope to talk about today.
Lovely, thank you.
Hi, I'm Dave Thomas, Director of Health Performance Audit at the Wales Audit Office. And over the years, we've had various looks at patient records and different thematic studies. And we'll draw on some of that as part of today's webinar.
Okay, thank you. So, how do you send your questions in? There are basically 2 types of options. You can send us by email, and that email address is good.practice@audit.wales. Or if you're on Twitter, we have a hashtag of WAO records. You can send it in that way. Finally, I think it's really important how I share with you how this information from today will be shared wider. One of the interesting things I've heard this morning at one of the health boards are tabling this webinar, because it is being recorded, as advanced listening prior to the next board meeting. So instead of having papers, they're having to listen to a webinar as part of the discussion. So I thought I'd share that with you. And what we will do, we will share this link with all health boards following that. Some health boards are using this webinar as part of their learning development afternoon on patient records. We will pull together all the tweets from the that we're sharing on that we'll pick up from the hashtag on Storyfy. As I've said, this recording will be available on YouTube probably about 15-20 minutes after we finish recording today. We're also going to blog about it. We've already got some blogs coming in about sort of how it feels to be working out in the community and accessing records. That'll be an interesting one. So without further ado, Dave, can I turn to you and say, okay, so why this webinar then, Dave?
Okay, thank you, Ina. Well, it goes without saying, doesn't it, really, that maintaining accurate and complete patient records is a central part of providing good quality clinical care. I'm going to show my age now because I took part in the original setting the record straight work by the Audit Commission back in 1995. When my team looked at clinical coding much more recently, it was amazing to see that many of the issues that we identified back in 1995 are still pertinent today. Issues such as poor completion of records, writing that you can't read, bits of the records being misfiled or simply just filed as loose bits of paper which then fall out. Patients having multiple records because they deal with different parts of the NHS or care system. And sometimes records getting lost, so temporary folders are created and adding to the complexity. And just physically, records being so large sometimes that they're almost impossible to navigate. So clearly the NHS in Wales is still struggling to tackle the problems with patient records. And whilst our trial systems no doubt will start to provide solutions over time, these won't happen overnight. So the maintenance of paper records is going to be with us certainly for quite a while yet, for both operational and legal reasons. So we hope the webinar today will be an opportunity just to share some solutions and we take that forward.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you for that. Thank you. So I think without further ado, I can see we've got some questions already coming in on governance. So I'm just giving the heads up to the panel members. So I'll, depending how many come through now on governance, if you've got some questions on governance, please send them in now because I'm going to be asking, I'll try and theme them together as quickly as I possibly can so the panel can start answering those. But without further ado, Anne-Louise, can I come to you on the first question, if I may? It's a simple question. Why is it important to have good quality record keeping?
Well, of course, you're asking that question of a lawyer, and I would say it's very important because otherwise I can't do my job properly. But one of the most important things to remember is who and why they come into being. Who are you writing the records for, and for what purpose? And when I'm trying to frighten doctors into making sure their notes are written, I say, what if when you go home this afternoon, you are run over by a bus? Who is going to know what you were thinking when you were seeing that particular patient? And of course, it's very easy when you're looking at a patient and thinking things to have a plan in your mind, but it doesn't get transcribed onto paper. And consequently, the next person who comes along doesn't see you. Patient now is perhaps unconscious, and no one can actually tell what you were seeing those few minutes ago. And so that it's absolutely essential for the well-being of the patient. And that's the primary reason to keep good clinical records. From my own point of view, bearing in mind that clinical negligence cases can take an awfully long time to actually come into existence. Those of you who are involved in both the investigation of concerns and the investigation of claims know that years and years can go by. Doctors, nurses, staff generally leave, they move around, they get married, they change their names, they go back to where they first originated, and it makes it very difficult for us to track them down and say, when you wrote this scrawl at 8 AM on the 12th of December 2012, can you tell me what you were actually thinking? And there's no one to answer that question, even if you could, and you could read your own handwriting. And a good example is a recent case that had to settle. It related to a chap who had got a foreign body in his eye, and he came into A&E and he was seen. He didn't have to wait 4 hours. He was seen, and it was recorded that he had a feeling in his left eye of a foreign body. But it was also recorded by the casualty officer, who made a little note saying occasional shadow in left eye. That record did not then find its way to the ophthalmologist who saw him 2 days later. We don't know why the ED record didn't find its way to the clinic, but the ophthalmologist didn't say, is there anything else the matter with your eye? She was just concentrating on the foreign object. He said in his statement sometime later, I did say that I had got problems with the eye and I did see shadows and white spots. Nothing recorded to that effect. And of course, what it comes down to is, who do you believe? If there's no note and you haven't got a story, and the patient whose eyesight is affected says it happened and you can't say it didn't, it's very difficult indeed to go into court and say, this is actually what happened. And we couldn't say. So it was a breach of duty of care not to have transferred that ED note to the ophthalmologist. The ophthalmologist did what she had to do. probably did in accordance with proper practice, but it wasn't possible in the end to fight that case, and so it had to be paid out, and all for the sake of a document not going from A to B.
What a sober start to our webinar. Annalise, thank you.
Ask a lawyer, hey?
Yeah. So Paul, can I come to you?
Yeah, so I've been one of the doctors harangued by the lawyers, and I've been one of the doctors that's written that scrawl at midnight, and I fully sign up to the fact that we need to be keeping better records because it protects us. But what I'd like to share is maybe a slightly more optimistic view of the amazing things that we can possibly do with good records. So I think we all agree that for patient care, we can have better, safer, more efficient care if we do keep records. And how we do that, I think, is maybe something that we talk about a bit later on. But we also need to think about patient records as actually a source of data. So they're not just about delivering patient care, and not just about delivering patient care that we deliver, it's other people as well. So if we think about records as capturing really high quality data at the point of care, we can do brilliant things with that. Audits, particularly topical given the building we're in, and everyone's involved in capturing audits, but typically that involves people going back and asking questions again and again, or trawling through lots and lots of records. But if we kept this information properly, we'd have all that information there. Most of us have very little information about what we actually do as clinicians, how good we are, what our performance is, but actually if we kept better information, we could have all that information available. And in an era where we all need to revalidate whatever profession we're in, I think that information is really going to be paramount. Research is a big thing, and I know it's a sort of dirty word sometimes to use health service information to carry out research, but actually it's an incredibly powerful tool. It's something that we're incredibly good at in the UK, and it's something we could be even better at if we kept the information in a really good form and captured it properly for the first time round, rather than going back and repeatedly asking little extra bits of information because we haven't actually thought through about what information we want to write down.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for that. So Dave, can I come to your response to the first question?
Two reflections, really. I absolutely agree with what colleagues have said already. I think from the patient angle, I think patients have justifiable expectations if they access different parts of the NHS, that everything that they see and do will be recorded and be available to the next person in the NHS who sees them. But we all know probably that doesn't occur, and certainly the Annalise's example shows that it doesn't happen in practice. You know, and think of it from the patient perspective, that they probably repeat their story every time and perhaps lose a bit of nuance each time. Important bits of information get lost. So absolutely endorse that point. And being a performance auditor, I would say there's a value for money angle in this. Of course, if people are duplicating their time, you know, there's an issue of actually effective use of resources. And, so there's a public angle as well.
That's a very fair comment. So thanks for your questions that are coming in on governance. We've got a couple of just been handed over to me now. So sorry guys, I didn't have time to give you a shout out about these. So it's how it goes sometimes. So the first questions come in about what assurances should board members be taking to ensure that we have good quality record keeping. So I think I'm going to come to you on this one, please, Anne-Louise, if I may.
At the moment, one of the systems behind the putting things right process for looking into incidents that have arisen is a requirement that lessons are learned from whatever the circumstances are. And I think it's very easy in the busyness of the day and getting the answers out to the patients to overlook that bit of the requirements of the regulations. And so I think it is essential for the boards to recognise that they really need to know what the lessons are that have been learned and then to promulgate them throughout the organisation.
Okay, thank you. Slightly different question. It's come from a non-exec member, and her concerns are with patient records, compliance with professional codes, the root causes litigation, patient care. So carrying on the theme of what you've just saying in terms of sort of the concerns that they have, what would your response be?
Well, my response is that the GMC and the NMC and indeed the GDC all require, and the professions allied with healthcare all require good notes to be taken. And of course, there are instances where doctors and nurses and others have gone before their regulatory panels and been significantly criticised for failing to keep them. And I think that's something that sometimes gets forgotten in just the general hectic nature of when you're trying to fill in a record or come back to it.
Okay. Dave, there was a question coming in about sort of if audit or the reviews continue raise issues relating to the quality of record keeping, but organisations are not taking actions and learning the lessons. What can be done?
Well, I guess it comes down to a matter of priority here, doesn't it? I mean, I think this issue needs to have the appropriate profile at a high enough level in organisations. You know, there needs to be an organisational commitment to getting this right. And it goes, you know, accountability should follow that. You know, we just talked in the previous question about what boards and board members should be getting as assurances. Well, there should be regular monitoring at the appropriate committee, the Information Governance Committee, and at the board itself if necessary. And that's a mechanism of local hold into account, and there are other mechanisms which Anne-Louise has indicated as well. But if it isn't a priority, then it won't get onto board agendas, and I think that's the key issue.
Okay. So as a commission, Paul, what will your thoughts be on those couple of points?
I think the thing we need to not forget is the patient voice, really. And I think we're in an age where patients have a greater expectation that they're actually going to see their records, that they're going to take part in their record keeping, both in checking the data quality, but also contributing information to that. And so I think people need to be aware that there is that expectation there, and that they will be held to account by patients as well as professionals and other bodies if those records aren't up to scratch.
That's a very powerful message, that one. So yeah, because otherwise, what do we do? Why are we here? It is about the patient at the end of the day. Another very interesting question has just come in. So we do presentations to junior doctors as part of the induction process on standards of record keeping. Is there any evidence within other health boards that some junior doctors state that they have not received training on the topics whilst in medical school? That's a good one. Thank you very much for that one. I've put everyone there. Oh, I've seen the look on the panel's face here. So let me just repeat that question in fairness to give the panel a bit of time to have a think about this. So we do presentations to junior doctors as part of the induction process on standards of record keeping. So the question is there any evidence within other health boards that some juniors state that they have not received training on this topic whilst in medical school? I'm actually going to check this back out to the people who are listening in. I wonder if you can help us with this question. Anyone got a response for that would like to email us back in on that one? So if you just put in the heading, you know, sort of response to junior doctors, please, that would be really helpful. And we'll pick that up in a couple of minutes if that's all right. Can I hold that one for a moment, if that's okay?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you very much. Okay. Got one more question to ask that are coming through here about the challenges of sharing records across sectors. It's something that you both mentioned here. So what are the challenges of sharing records across sectors that are working in partnership, and what can be done to overcome these?
I don't think I'm the best person to respond, because of course it just makes me pull my hair out when I can see that there haven't been records following, but how to solve that, I just don't know. Okay.
Paul, do you have any responses that you could share on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the current state of play that many of us will be used to is you get a sort of carbon copy of an A4 sheet that somebody scrawled on, and that's your sole method of transferring some incredibly complex piece of medical information about somebody's 6 weeks in hospital. And yet you expect ongoing management to be based on that. And that clearly is unsafe and needs to change. And so I think I would be a big proponent of the fact that we should have digital records that are transferable. We should be able to not only share the whole record between primary and secondary care, but our transfers of care should be done in a much more organised way. And that's not by no means straightforward. There are many, many challenges to that. I think something which I hope to bring up later on is how we standardise that approach, the work that the college has led on in developing some standards for that, so that we don't have a vision where everybody in the NHS has the same piece of software and the same computer, but all our computers can talk to each other.
Yeah, okay, fair comment, okay. So it's over to you folks. Have you heard given what the panel have just said, do you have any questions for them or any observations that you might like to make? Or maybe there's some good practice out there you might like to share that you're doing. Please email them in on good.practice@audi.wales or on the Twitter hashtag of WAO Records. Thank you. So I'm going to move on now to the next question, and I'm going to kick off with you, Dave, if I may, if that's all right. So the second question I'm going to pose to the panel is, what are the key solutions to improving the standard of record keeping? Can I kick off with you?
You can, thank you, Una. Well, I would say that there are clear guidance and standards that have been around for a long time in terms of what good records could look like. And really, going back to some previous discussions earlier on, it's around just reinforcing that. And but perhaps not so much the compliance angle, but maybe engaging staff a bit more so they actually understand the reasons and importance for doing it, so it becomes more of a sort of a buy-in rather than the compliance, although you would need to have some compliance checking through the mechanisms we talked about earlier. And perhaps make it clear as to what the benefits and also the risks of not completing good records are, and that might sort of start to help improve some of the issues we've all been discussing already.
I think Anne-Louise's sobering introduction was sort of be reason enough.
It is, yeah. Well, I think, you know, you need to have accountability as well, of course.
Yeah.
We spoke about it earlier. If you are identifying perennial poor practice, poor compliance with standards, there does need to be some grit in the system there, so there's some accountability locally.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. Paul, can I come to you on this?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I could pick up part of that question about training. I haven't got hard data to say whether training on record keeping is available in all medical schools or whether it's variable. But to the best of my knowledge, it is, and it has evolved over time. So that when I was at medical school, which is quite a while ago now, we were trained, but it was much more of an apprenticeship model where you watch what other people did, you developed your own style, and then you did it in your own sort of slightly unique way. And depending on what kind of doctor you ended up being, you recorded things differently, really. And as a physician, we would say that we were the best at recording lots of information, whereas other people would maybe record a scrawl. But I think that that's not up to scratch, and there are now more formalised ways of doing that. And I know in certain medical schools, there's direct observation of how people record information, and they try to structure this with people watching sort of the same vignettes on videos, and then the task of actually how you're going to record that information, and you can actually assess that, and you can apply some quality markers to that. So I think things are improving, but I don't have any more information about that.
Okay, thanks, Paul. And Louise, before I come to you, I'm going to actually pose a question out to you there. Do you have any solutions to improving the standards of record keeping? Are you happy to share it with us? We'd love to hear your stories. That's at good.practice@audit.wales. Thank you. And Louise, can I come to you?
I think perhaps mine are don'ts rather than do's, but the do is that the training needs to give people the confidence as to what they should be recording. One of the issues that we come across quite often is what's contemporaneous and when should you write the records, and what is then regarded as retrospective. And there was quite a lot of talk about this a few years ago, and I still am asked about it now, because quite clearly, even as a lawyer, I don't expect doctors or nurses or midwives to be able to write at the same time as actually delivering the care. However lovely that would be from my point of view, because the timing and working out timings of when notes were written and when therefore the care was delivered can be very difficult and absolutely crucial in a medical legal matter. But I think understanding why you can write a note retrospectively and when it might be worthwhile actually recording that it's retrospective is something that I think a lot of people new to the profession find very difficult and don't quite understand. And I think it's actually understanding the day-to-day practicalities that junior members of all clinical staff need some confidence about, and I think that would help very much. But otherwise, I do think it's auditing, checking, discussing, not, I don't think the kind of the name and shame it. It really has got to be the supportive way of looking at it, and perhaps because Paul raised it, you perhaps do have times when you actually call a patient in and have a chat about the notes, because there are issues where patients hate what you've written in the notes, but sometimes whatever they don't like has got to remain in them. So it's got to be something that they feel confident about. And just another don't, I really, really hate pro formas, because if you've got a square in which you have to put a tick and you don't put a tick, did you do whatever it was, or did you just forget to put the tick? It's much better to have free form in most instances. I know all of you are jumping up and down and saying, no, there are clinics when it's much better to have a tick box. But, you know, how do you make that tick go there if you've just forgotten? It's really problematic.
I'm hearing a theme here. There are two themes coming through. A jointly owned patient record. Because at the end of the day, it is about them, isn't it?
Definitely, I have to pick up the point about free form, otherwise I would have to be severely reprimanded by my employer.
Oh,
so
okay.
At the Royal College of Physicians, we would strongly feel that isn't the way forward. We feel that you need standardisation of how we record information. If you're going to move into a digital age, you can't have a system where there are an infinite number of variables about how you record the same bit of information. So if I want to write that somebody's had chest pain and it was stage 7 out of 10 and I think it's a heart attack, there probably are 100 ways that I could express that. And you can't communicate that information safely between different systems if you've got 100 variables. So we do need some degree of standardization. And what the college has led on is work on how you would do that. And it's not reinventing the wheel, it's just formalizing actually what an admission history should look like, what a discharge summary should look like, and all of the options that you've got there. We wouldn't want tick boxes where you had to fill in every single thing. We think they should be optional, but we think there is a way of applying a structure to it which helps us to transmit information, actually improves the quality, and does make things safer.
And then you've got the issue of training, audit, audit, because otherwise, if, for example, my bugbear is the All Wales pathway in maternity, and they can be very well filled in, they can be great documents, and they can be appalling and not be very helpful from a lawyer's point of view. And I know I keep going back to being a lawyer, but that's why I'm here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, please do.
I think just pick up those 2 points. It's I guess it's about actually the staff who are filling those forms realising that what's on the form is important. So if they aren't well designed, well laid out, and they contain material which don't necessarily seem to be pertinent to the really important bit of patient care, then there's a risk they won't get completed. So I think the research and the standardisation of those whatever assessment checklists are is really important. We did touch on induction as well, just briefly. And I suppose the concern I've got is that I guess the induction for new staff, medical or nursing, is ever increasing in terms of the volume of stuff they've got to cover. And there's a real risk, I suppose, of something that's potentially as mundane as medical records may be perceived to be, gets squeezed off that agenda. So going back to the priority setting in terms of where we see this, you want to protect sufficient time on that induction and basic training to cover those bits off. And Louise is a bit about monitoring, auditing, and feedback as well if there are clearly bits internally which aren't happening.
Okay.
Hugely important.
There's obviously a theme coming through about induction process, because we've had another question coming in earlier. It says record keeping should form part of the induction process, but more and more of it has been omitted due to the broad range of issues that need to be covered in induction. And following what you're saying, the comment that you said here, because what they're asking is what can be done to get the importance of record keeping back on the agenda? Hopefully your comments will reinforce the importance of having it back on the agenda.
Yes, I think just, you've got to protect sufficient time for that, even if it means the induction is a bit longer. I think it's about planning the induction and not seeing as something you can do as and when. So, maybe pause with a perspective from the clinical side, that is what it's like in practice.
Yeah, I think there's a role for both the carrot and the stick, really. I think people need to be aware that the information that they're recording is of paramount importance and protects them, but also we need to spread the message of the fact that actually this is information that's going to be really useful for them. It's really useful when you're handing over patients, when you're transferring care, when you're seeing people subsequently, when you want to do some research, when you've got to do an audit. So it's a combination of both of those, really. And I think it's everybody's responsibility. Record keeping often falls to the most junior staff, particularly in a hospital environment, but we need to see it as everyone's responsibility to ensure that we keep good quality records and that we incrementally improve things.
So are junior doctors involved in the sort of development of the records?
I think that's very variable. It depends really, but largely our records are either pro formas, which in many cases aren't necessarily well designed but could be better, or it is free-form narrative on a lined piece of paper really, and it's up to anybody about what they write on that basis.
Okay, some interesting responses here. I can see there's a couple of quality questions coming through. So rather, if you've got any questions on quality, do you want to email them through to me now, and we'll cover them in the next round if that's okay. So I'm going to move on to the third question now. Dave, are you happy to kick off with you? So the third question I'm going to pose to the panel is, how can paper records be coordinated so that all information is in one place?
Longer pipe, please.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and not be utopian actually, but I suppose there are things you can do. And you mentioned paper, but we talked earlier about digitization of records, and that might be one practical way forward. I mean, I'd like to float to see what my fellow colleagues on the panel make of this, so whether there's more scope to introduce patient health records. Now, then I think clearly for some conditions that's not going to be ever so practical. For others, I mean, it's been used in maternity for a long time, but other conditions like diabetes or other chronic conditions where patients are frequently crisscrossing different healthcare professionals, where a patient health record might be a solution, and lots of risks to that.
Yeah.
But you know, that might be a solution that could be used more of than it is at the moment. And I guess we talked earlier about standardization as well. If everybody's got a different way of doing it, that I suppose almost reinforces the different record keeping in different bits of the NHS. So maybe a sort of single sort of look and form to a record could be helpful.
Okay. Yeah, because the fax is live and well in the NHS, I understand.
It is.
Yeah. Okay. So Paul, can I come to you on this?
I think my simple answer is they can't. I don't think paper records are fit for purpose. I don't think they meet the needs of increasingly complex medical care that we deliver over multiple centres, by multiple different staff, by multiple professional groups. I'm not sure there's any way we can easily move bits of paper around, however way we collate them, however good we have transport, whether it's given to the patient or not. I don't think that works well.
Okay.
I also don't think it supports new methods of delivering care. So we need to be looking at whether we actually have patient-held records that are electronic, that they own and edit and control some of the content for, but also whether we deliver healthcare via teleconference, whether we deliver healthcare by the telephone, whether we deliver remote clinics so we can get specialist services into rural areas. And those things aren't facilitated by moving bits of paper around. So I think the simple answer is that we can't. At the moment, we're stuck with paper, but we incrementally need to move towards using more and more electronic systems and hopefully phasing out paper.
Okay. And Louise, before I come to you, I'd like to pose a question to the delegates on this one, because sort of, you know, many heads make light work. What are you doing about it? Have you got any interesting practices that you want to share with us that we can share wider across the community who's listening in? So, Anne-Louise, how can paper records be coordinated so that all information is in one place?
Oh, I agree with Paul. I don't think they can. However, whilst I absolutely agree that we will have to, in the same way as offices, to do almost every sort of job are becoming digitised, there are paper records going back very many years, and they're not well managed because they never have been, because it is very difficult indeed. So much paper is generated, and I think it's absolutely essential from now on to make sure that those records that have to be stored, and some have to be stored for many, many years, are stored as comprehensively, not in buildings that are about to be declared derelict, not in buildings that are going to be flooded. I think the care of paper records is going to be essential over the next few years, because one of the major risks, as I see it, and there have been cases and deaths as a result, are where there's a combination of paper record and digital, where the two don't completely marry up, or the person isn't aware of the one or the other, and therefore incorrect care is provided. And had the two been available together, then the error might not have occurred. And so I think that whilst I, with dread in my heart, agree that we've got to move to you can hear I'm significantly affected by this digitisation. Whilst I can see that that is the future, it is absolutely essential for all sorts of reasons that if the scanning process, and I see scanned records all the time, and they're poorly scanned very often because it's outsourced to companies who have people doing it, and it must be the most boring job on the planet. I think I'd rather look after loos than scan records. But if they're poorly scanned, you might just as well not bother at all. And I think that's crucial. I think we've got to get better. We've got to recognise that it's a dreadful job, but it has to be done.
Okay. One of the points we said that records have been kept for a certain length of time. In the world of audit, we have very strict guidelines how long they need to be kept. Does that apply the same for patient records?
It does.
So what are we talking about?
So we're talking, it depends on the type of record for the moment. And so for a child, usually they're kept for up to 25 years.
Okay.
And so that's essential. For example, if a child has been born and there's a brain injury, you definitely don't want those to go walkabout. Most records, there are old Welsh office guidance on the retention of records, and mostly 7 years. The issue with X-rays is that they used to take up an awful lot of space, so they were digitised. The problem with the digitisation was that when they weren't digitised very well, they couldn't be manipulated. Interestingly, it shows where technology can be a problem. If you have a digitised X-ray, as I understand it, you can then manipulate it in a way that it wouldn't have been intended to be manipulated. So that can cause a problem as well. So that, you can make solutions, but you can make problems for yourself. But I think it is actually keeping the records together, and that the way in which NHS records are held with pipe cleaners, held with envelopes stuck on the back. And we are going to be in the paper world for a long time, whatever your good services are. So I think that it is essential. It makes it very difficult, and it makes it very difficult for patients. And going back to my early example, that was just a record on a piece of paper, and many of you will be familiar with A&E records, which are just very little, and so easy to get misfiled, not to be picked up and moved to the right department. And it's that kind of thing, the coordination of paper. I think indexing is very difficult, and perhaps we become so used to the digital world that we forget that paper just doesn't behave the same way as our emails.
I'm hearing a very strong message about sort of, often when people are moving from, when they're redesigning a service, they have the ability to, if you like, if you do a step change. Here, it's either digital or paper you're suggesting, not sort of the sort of hybrid.
Yeah, too dangerous, too risky.
Okay. Any observations from the rest of the panel on this?
I think I agree with all that and understand the risks. I'd like to pick up one particular point, which Anna-Marie mentioned, which is where records are stored. And I think we've been around, got a few sites in Wales over the years, and you really do see some quite worrying sites. I think that shows, really that perhaps it's not high enough up the priority agenda. So people are saying, actually, here's some really important clinical information, be it for clinical order purposes or just for medical legal reasons, and are stored in the most really horrendous places, which are prone to flooding, actually have flooding. The risk of losing records there is huge, absolutely huge, and I think the importance of that being recognised, at the highest level in NHS bodies is essential.
Okay, thank you for that. Before there's a couple of questions we've got coming in on digitalisation already. We shouldn't be surprised on that one. Any observations you'd like to make, Paul?
Just picking up from a sort of legal perspective, wholeheartedly agree that we need to keep the record. But I think we sometimes perceive it as the sort of the holy grail of information, which we often lug around from site to site and clinic to clinic, and people often will come into sort of hospital clinic with 4 or 5 volumes of notes, which we perceive as everything we need to know about them. But then I would freely admit that we don't read it.
Yeah.
In a 20-minute consultation, I read the last few letters and I read a summary.
Okay.
I don't flick through an entire sort of 4 or 5 volumes of notes. And so I think we need to think about how we use the notes. We should definitely save this information, and we need to be able to use it when needed. But a lot of the time, what we need to get better at is actually summarising records.
Accurate summaries. Yeah.
Okay. So some key learning points coming about that, the importance of summarising, and the reason what you're saying in terms of sort of, this isn't a service where you can sort of take the small step changes. It's either one or the other, otherwise there are consequences. And Dave, I'm hearing messages from you about sort of the importance of where records are stored. Very important message from there.
Can I just pick up one of those about, and it arises from the summarisation. And actually I think Paul's right. I think the physicians are very good, very often at keeping records, and paediatricians probably in my scale of good practice, paediatricians come up very high. They're physicians who deal with children who go off very quickly, and therefore their records are usually very good indeed. But I think that there are discharge summary formats which are very good, and there are others that are poor, and I think we are very slow to pick up the best practice of things that have been invented already.
Okay. Are you drawing our attention to particular good practice there?
Well, I think the ones that I see that I think are the most useful are the discharge summaries that come out of the neonatal units.
Okay.
And they are comprehensive, full enough, brief enough, and support the next steps.
Okay, thank you for that. So I have a question for the delegates now that's come in. So is there any evidence that the move to digitalised solutions is achieving any expected benefits? Are there any good practice in the UK or further afield that could be shared in Wales? So over to you folks. Do you have any responses to that one you would like to share wider? I'll just repeat the question once again. Dev, can you put this question out on Twitter for me as well, please? Thank you. Is there any evidence that the move to digitalised solutions is achieving any expected benefits? Are there any good practice in the UK or further afield that could be shared? So we'll send that out on Twitter as well. But if you have any observations you'd like to share with us, please do email, that'd be great. So let's move on to some solutions and about record keeping. Dave, can I kick off with you on this one, if I may? What are the key solutions to reducing the amount of paper used in records? And I remember you telling me the story of I have seen pictures of records of a single patient this high. And I said, oh, what have you got there? So that's one patient record file. And it was enormous. And it was sort of, it had elastic bangs around it. It was showing some of the forms had been ripped, or that the quality of the forms weren't very good because they were actually faxes. And it was incredible. And I said, oh, was that the one from 1999? He said, no, that was the one from last year, from the audit we did last year. I found that quite, whew. Okay, so key solutions then.
Well, just to say that, how on earth can something which looks like that be a proper clinical record? People just can't navigate their way around it, and they can't possibly be fit for purpose. So the solution is needed. And I guess we kind of talked a little bit already, haven't we, this afternoon? And even though there is a sort of some caveats and some risks you've got to manage around the digitalization and the archive, and that has to be the solution. I think clear archiving policy, and there's good practice around archiving, clear summation, I think, and I suppose being clear about what's essential to keep and what isn't. Okay. But there probably is within these really large records a number of stuff which you probably could safely maybe weed out. Okay. And so weeding and archiving is, something which has been around for a long time, but I guess it needs resource. Yeah. And I think that's a question again comes back to sort of, how important is this in the grand scheme of things? And NHS bodies being under pressure. Perhaps the world of medical records needs to be a little bit sexier within the health force. Okay.
Wow, sexier medical records in one sentence. Thank you, Dave. Thank you very much. We've got some more questions coming in. Thank you. Wow. Right. Okay, Paul, can I come over to you on this one? Is that the key solutions?
I'm not sure I have the solution, but I think we agree that we need to move towards electronic records, but that's not an easy step. And so what we need to do is to think about the incremental steps that we can take, so the easy gains that we can make that both make things safer, easier, more efficient, and then reduce our reliance on paper. So a few sort of examples would be things like it's common now that our radiology reports and our pathology reports are all available electronically, and we use them through a sort of portal system, and everyone is quite happy with that. Yet it's still not uncommon that you see results handwritten in the notes. You see them on a flow chart which somebody is manually filling in, and then you see little A5 bits of paper which are stuck in the back of the notes, all containing exactly the same piece of information. And so I think we need to look at better ways of actually where we're going to store this information, where we've got confidence that it's available, and maybe looking at systems where we can acknowledge that people have seen it, have acted on it, and so we're not having to write those things down. Okay. Things like transfers of care, so discharge summaries. Again, there are good ways of doing that, there are bad ways of doing that as well, and we need to pick out the bits that work, the bits that don't work, and to improve that. Things like e-prescribing, which again has got good evidence of improved safety. It can build in things like decision support tools, clinical guidance, which is just not possible in a paper world, really, and so we need to be thinking about that. And then maybe learning lessons from GPs who have moved to digital records decades ago and have had great success. And those systems aren't perfect, but they do maybe give us some lessons about what we could be doing and how we could be integrating with those.
All right, okay. Maybe we will share that link out with everybody later on, if that's okay, yeah? Yeah, so I'm making a note, Beth, that we need to capture that link then, if that's okay, that's great, okay. And Louise, before I come to you, there's a couple of questions that are coming in, and they're all around sort of a couple of observations. Thank you for this. I will share them following weeks. I'm going to have a read of them before I actually share them, if that's right, to get my head around what's been asked. Talking about writing. Thank you. So Anne-Louise, without further ado, over to you, if I may. I'll take that question, if I may.
I don't think I've got a solution to reducing paper, but I think what you've heard already about it's just reducing it in such a way that you don't lose the critical information, and that's really from the patient's point of view as well as for mine, because as you know, I would like to keep as much information as possible, but I think that there is a view in health service that everything has to be kept all the time, so the duplication is causing some of these stacks of records. And I think that doesn't help because then people find it very difficult to navigate their way around. I suppose one of my concerns is the coding, and I know that's something that and actually what I describe something to be, and what you describe something to be, and you do, and it just, I think that's the crucial thing, that we aren't always made in the same mold, and therefore it is very difficult, because I might just be thinking about it from a completely different point of view, and doctors will, and nurses will, because their training is different. And I think that there are significant challenges to overcome in actually making people understand in the digital world how to be able to access the information that has been so much better stored than it used to be.
Okay. Do you want to come back on that, Paul? Because I see you nodding quite sort of, are you agreeing with the comments there?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing it was sort of reminding me of is I think of our style of note keeping. That there is, keeping a clinical record is essentially a record of your opinion in a lot of senses. Sometimes you're recording facts, you're recording observations, but sometimes you're sort of assimilating that information to come towards an opinion and to express that. And so I think it's quite reasonable at times to actually write, I think this is X because of Y, really, and put your evidence down, put your thought process down, rather than just saying, this is the diagnosis, because you are often wrong, really. But if you can justify why you've come to that, or why you've decided on a treatment plan, I think that's incredibly useful for subsequent people and for yourself if you're ever challenged on it.
Okay, thank you for that. Can I just check, Beth, is this two separate questions or one question? Okay, so I'm going to read a very long question out here, so thank you very much for these questions. So, can you advise when the consultation will come out with regards to updating retention schedules so that obsolete records can be appropriately managed? WHC 2071 is very out of date, and most organisations have adopted the previous DOH retention guidelines, but there is new guidelines which includes far more on digitalisation processes. And then I've got a couple of others on this one. Obviously, this is a strong topic going out there. I'm going to pose this question back out to the delegates out there as well, and ask the panel to form a view on this. This one is kind of, no, I'll keep this one separate for a minute, but I'm going to hand it over to Paul and have a quick read on that one for a minute. So I'm looking to Dave and I'm looking to Anne-Louise to give me some thoughts on sort of, can you advise when the consultation will come out with regards to updating retention schedules so that obsolete records can be appropriately managed?
No, I agree that there are moves afoot to update it, and it's high time. I suspect that actually knowing what to put in the updated guidance is quite tricky for the reasons that we've been discussing today.
Okay. Any observations?
No, I'm afraid I don't have answers to it.
It's quite a specific question on this one, isn't it? Okay, so what we'll do is we'll pose this question on Twitter and on a couple of other methods and find out if we can get some responses for you on that one, if that's okay. Another question has come through. Sorry, Paul. Okay. You mentioned that record keeping is often left to the most junior of staff. What needs to be done to engage with senior staff in the organisation, such as consultants? It's a fair question.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I have a solid answer to that, but I think it comes back to that mixture of carrot and stick, really. I suspect that senior members of clinical staff are the ones that are most likely to have been involved with litigation, complaints, issues about poor record keeping, and so can hopefully see the benefits of why good records need to be kept. And there may be some degree of role in actually sort of future appraisal, revalidation, as a marker, really. It is a marker of quality of care, I think, and that needs to be embraced. But then I think that this sort of the carrot to that is that hopefully people can see the benefits of other things they can achieve by keeping good quality records, rather than simply fear that they're going to be sued in the future and may need to defend themselves. Okay. There is also a role, I think, for juniors, although they are the most junior members of staff and they are maybe more responsible, but they're often the biggest innovators, really. These are the people who are going to take up electronic systems and roll with them. And so these are people who have a huge influence. They can often bring a lot of information. They often move around organisations much more than senior staff. And so I think sometimes seeking their opinions, getting them involved in service improvement is a real opportunity.
That's a great point to make there. Thank you for that. Anne-Louise, any observations you'd wish to make on this one?
I think the health service is still quite hierarchical, and therefore leading by example is still absolutely crucial. And there is no doubt that good teams usually have good consultants who are at the top, who are encouraging them and making sure that they're good and pick them up if they're not. I would also just like to say very few doctors ever get sued. So, you know, I might make a lot of noise, but it's a relatively unusual thing.
From an audit point of view and wearing a governance hat in a sort of ownership and sort of taking responsibility for actions or inactions is actually quite something quite appropriate, because, you know, whether you're head of an organisation, in terms of assurance, we'd be seeking assurance that, you know, so the same would apply to a doctor and a consultant. Question mark.
Well, I think I'd just like to make the point that the organisational learning is really important here. So, you know, if you haven't learning exercise going on in the health bodies around learning from complaints or litigation and concerns, of which medical records are at the heart, then, you know, so that feedback loop back to senior staff to help them realise the importance of that, and maybe help them get the message. So going back to the original question, how do you get senior staff engaged in this? And I think just add that to what's been said already.
Okay. We've had a couple of questions coming in about, not questions, sort of, they're quite rhetorical in some ways, but sort of, it's a fair one. Do you see a future where patients should be able to access their own records through their smartphones? And the couple of points they've added to this makes absolute sense. So, you know, they'd be able to share it with paramedics if they're involved in an incident, or if they were ill, sort of in a different part of the country, they'd have the access to that records. Patient owners owning their own records?
Could they be read-only?
Interesting observation to make, yeah.
So I can come in on this and say, yes, it already exists in certain forms. So if there's not yet a system that I'm aware of where you can simply open up the entire health record. There are various systems where you can access certainly your primary care record. That's quite common, and it's widely available.
Can I just hold you there for a second, Beth? Can we make a note of that? So we'll share that link about the primary care record. We'll share that link out if that's okay, yeah.
And there are also systems of what are called sort of personal health records, really. They're often disease or condition based rather than the entire record. But they are systems where people can keep track of their own information. They often can contribute to information, and they can fact check and check the validity of information. But yeah, you're quite right. It's rare that they can delete information. That sort of primary author has to delete information. And that the use case there of emergency settings and things, I think, is very valid. Really, that is being used. So my own sphere of inflammatory bowel disease, we do share information with patients. We do have electronic communication with them. They are able to keep their own symptom tracker records, and they're able to inform us via electronic messaging if they're well, if they're not well, how they're getting on with their medication, and linked to other services as well. So there are things out there, although it isn't universal, and it's evolving.
There's a natural question follow on this one for you, Paul, if I may. Thank you very much for your questions coming in, folks. Much, much appreciated. The cost of electronic solutions is often seen as a barrier, yet there is rarely any consideration for the cost associated with paper records. Any thoughts? Because, yeah, if you look at the sort of whole life costing of as you think about how many places you've seen during the course of the audit in terms of where records are kept, because they have to be kept for a period of time, and the amount of paper and the storage and the resource of moving them back and forth and so forth. So I'll just repeat that question in order to give the panel a bit of time to have a thought. The cost of electronic solution is often seen as a barrier, yet there's rarely any consideration of the cost associated with paper records. Any thoughts?
So I just said I clearly agree with that, because I'd like to see any business case for a new IT system include an assessment of the cost of not doing it, which would be, I suppose, an element of risk. If you do nothing, what might you be carrying as a risk, and what costs might be associated with that?
Absolutely.
And it isn't often part of the business case model. I mean, clearly cost benefit is done, but so yeah, I think in an austere climate where, you know, capital expenditure is thin on the ground, then I think that wider business case look is quite important.
Okay, thank you for that. Thanks, Dave. Any observations?
So I don't have figures at all, but I think there's no argument that electronic systems do cost money to both develop and implement. But there is evidence that those systems can offer safety benefits. So particularly things like e-prescribing, there's very good evidence that it reduces drug errors, it reduces drug interactions. And so there is certainly an argument that can be made for spending money to achieve benefit. And also anecdotally, we see an awful lot of care that's duplicated. So people move around and they have repeated tests, they have repeated scans because nobody knows that the scan's already been done, or if they know it's been done, they can't see the results, so they do it again. So again, I think there is an argument to say that electronic systems would make us more efficient.
Okay. Dare I ask you, Anne-Louise, because I know you're thinking about this.
Well, I said at the outset I was going to be the voice of doom, and as one who is struggling to go paperless in our office and therefore totally, utterly reliant on the NHS IT infrastructure, I would say, can there be investment in the infrastructure before we start chucking more things on top of that? Rather, it has to be cost effective, I recognise that, but we're not going to have a world-class NHS in Wales if we don't invest very, very significantly in our IT. That includes the basic infrastructure, the support, the number of people you have running around supporting it, because you'll otherwise have doctors, nurses, all the support staff standing there like this, unable to move because their system has gone down. It's happening in our office much too often to be comfortable, and because we don't have the comfort of a lovely warm file to cuddle, it is very difficult.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So before I come to ask the panel their last questions, what's their one key message that they'd like to leave you with today? Firstly, I'd like to say thank you very much to you folks for actually sharing your questions, much appreciated. Also, we'd like to share an approach that we're taking as part of the Good Practice team. That's called randomised coffee trials. I'm not going to tell you any more about it now, other than to say that after this webinar, we're going to send you a link to what it's all about. It's a way of continuing the conversation virtually, and it's like we'll match you up with someone who will have been listening into this webinar to try and continue the conversation, to see what their thoughts are. We're asking you to sign up for 20 minutes. You don't really actually have to have a cup of coffee. You don't actually have to meet face to face. You can have a chat with the phone. You can do it over Skype. You can do it over if you've got FaceTime, or you can just literally meet in a local coffee place, whatever works for you. But it's a way of continuing the conversation and seeing what sort of approaches you're taking to maybe someone who's got a different approach, and maybe there's some lessons learned you can adapt. Because as a Good Practice team, we have a very simple philosophy. We don't believe in advocating one size fits all. We believe adapting, not adopting. And also, we don't believe in certainly reinventing the wheel, because you might have done some really good work, and by sharing it just means you're saving time and energies. So I'm going to come to the panel now to ask them their final question. Thinking about what they've shared today, you're all at different parts of your journey in terms of sort of moving record keeping on. So I'm going to turn to Anne-Louise first and to ask her, what's the one key message, given what you've heard today, that you want to share with delegates in terms of moving record keeping forward in their particular health board?
I think that it isn't just something that needs to be limited to the induction. I think doctors who are just starting out have got lots and lots of things to think about. Record keeping is only one of them, and probably the least scary of all the things they're left to do on their own. I think it really needs proper management mentoring to make sure that they start their practice the way they need to go on.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would support that, and the evolution as people become more senior, really.
Okay.
I think the key is that we need to think of patient records as not just a patient record. It's not just a record of a single episode of care. It's a way of collecting high quality data about the care that we deliver and about patients. And it's about putting patients at the centre of that, really. We're not creating records about diseases, we're creating records about patients.
Okay, thank you. And finally, to Dave.
Well, building on what Kaj just said, and I would look to organisations to recognise the importance of it, and to identify somebody or people, more than one person, who are senior enough to act as champions within the organisations to really make something happen. Because if it isn't prioritised, it simply won't happen. Yeah,
I'm getting that message loud and clear. Thank you for that. Panel, can I say thank you very, very much to you three. Can I also say, to your right, you can't see them, Dyfrig and Bethan have been busily sort of tweeting out messages and bringing the questions to us. So thank you very much. And to you folks, thank you very much for your questions, and thank you very much for engagement. Much appreciated. So just to recap now, This video will go live shortly. Is it about 20 minutes, Bethan? In about 20 minutes, it will be up on YouTube on the Wales Audit Office account. We will send you a copy of that link. We will also pull together all the tweets against the hashtag of WAO records. So you've got a story of the tweets and they'll all be in chronological order. A couple of delegates who are listening in today have said that they're going to blog about certain things that they're actually doing in terms of digitized pens and things like that. So we will share with those in due course. We'll also share with the delegates who are actually listening in, so you can see for yourself who has actually been listening in. So it's time for me to say thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm Ina Lloyd. I'm signing off on behalf of the Good Practice team of the Wales Audit Office. Diolch yn fawr i chi gyd.